Hey guys, this is Luca and I am with the man. Can you please introduce yourself to the audience?
My name is Davide. I'm the man behind Podcast Italiano and I teach Italian.
You teach Italian and you teach Italian pronunciation. And today we want to talk about pronunciation, why it's important, whether it is important in language learning. And without further ado, let's get started. So, first question is, does it matter to have a good pronunciation when you speak a foreign language, or you think that the most important thing is actually to speak the language no matter how good or bad your pronunciation is?
No, it doesn't matter. Bye.
Okay, that's it. The end of the interview is like 30 seconds. We made it very concise.
I think it matters. I think it's important. Obviously, speaking and using the language is the most important thing. But I think it plays a role, and I don't know if you agree with me, but I think it's probably one of the aspects that's most overlooked about language learning. I don't know if you would agree with me on that.
I agree with you. I agree. I think one of the most overlooked aspects is actually intonation within the the general pronunciation thing. But I think that in school, at least as far as I'm concerned, you're from Turin, right?
Yes.
You're Italian. Like me, I've never heard of intonation pronunciation in school. Just when I was learning English.
The problem is that many teachers actually don't know how to teach pronunciation. Oftentimes,
But he does.
I think I do, or at least I know more than most teachers. Most teachers, I don't know if I can say most teachers. Many teachers, at least in public education in Italy, don't even have a good pronunciation themselves.
Right.
So, I think pronunciation is important for many reasons. Number one, it makes you sound more authoritative. It makes you sound better. It makes you sound more credible to the ears of native speakers. And this is something that just happens. It's just like, I can't say that it's either good or bad, but it's just a fact of life that if you speak with a good accent, people are going to think better of you.
Right. It's true. I think it's true. I had a lot of positive experiences when it comes to speaking a bunch of languages, I think relatively well when it comes to pronunciation. But you also have very good pronunciation in the languages that you speak. And I want to ask you, is that important for you? So let me rephrase the question.
But that's just one of the reasons why pronunciation is important.
Yes. But in your specific case, right, I can tell because this guy is a polyglot, he doesn't just teach Italian, he speaks a bunch of other languages. Every language you speak has... you have a very good pronunciation. So my question is, were you interested in that? Is that important for you? And do you think that played a huge role in the acquisition of such a good pronunciation in various languages in your specific case?
I would say in my case, it's probably one of the most fun things to do right from the start. Because, you can master pronunciation, or you can get pronunciation to a very good level in a relatively short time span. You don't need years to make your pronunciation very good. Like, of course you can improve, but like you can get, I think, 80% of the way there in not that, not in years or in a matter of months probably. Whereas pronunciation and vocabulary take years. So I think pronunciation, if you know the rules, you can get pretty good in a relatively short or manageable
amount of
time frame. Yeah. So in my case, I really like pronunciation because, first of all, I think
it makes you sexy.
It makes you sexy. It makes you, I don't know. It's like, for me, like learning a language without pronunciation just isn't the same. It's like, to me, it's like if I were to be speaking English like this, it's like in my mind I'm speaking Italian just with different words and different grammar construction, but it's not the same. Like, you have to, I guess, taste the pronunciation, if that makes sense. Taste the pronunciation in your mouth. I just love the way my mouth feels when I'm actually producing sounds that are different from my own, the ones that I have in my native language.
Same here, and I would add that to me, you hit the nail on the head when you said that. Is just, if I spoke like this is like I start thinking in Italian as well. I speak English, but I think in Italian. Well, if I speak like this, it's a different matter. I speak and I think in a different way. So sounds are connected and associated in my mind with a different, I wouldn't go so far as to say different identity, but I do feel different when I speak through different sounds. So for me, it's like my my brain is on another wavelength when I speak with this pronunciation, while if I speak English with an Italian pronunciation, it's completely different. And the other thing that was really interesting for me that you said is that you like the way it feels in your mouth. And it's true. I just love it, the way it feels when I speak a foreign language. So it's amazing, right? And the other thing you said, and I want to ask you one more question about this. You said it doesn't take much time, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of people think that you have to deliberately sit down just to learn pronunciation as a different part of the language. You have to do this training. You can do that, but don't you think that also by listening and reading and a little bit of training, on top of that can help, and you don't need that much time and that much effort to learn the pronunciation of a foreign language?
Yeah, of course. I mean, this varies a lot.
Right.
It really depends on many factors, and everybody's journey with pronunciation is going to differ. But I think, I mean, pronunciation is something that, as I think every skill in language learning takes some, passive exposure to the language and some active practice. And I think we were talking about deliberate practice. I think you really have to practice deliberately when learning pronunciation, because otherwise it's not going to come out. I mean, in a way, it is going to come out naturally, especially if you're talented and if you have a good ear, which, I mean, I think it plays a role. Mm-hmm. It plays a role in acquiring a good pronunciation. It definitely does help if you have a good ear, and I think I do, and I'm sure you do too. But if you don't have that innate talent, I think it doesn't really matter, because you can still improve. And the key here, and I think in language learning too, is to try to get better. Not try to be perfect, try to get better, and try to do what you can in order to improve. And there's always room for improvement. So.
Right. Well said. Very well said. Okay, so let's move on. And the other question is, the next question. What are the common struggles, specifically for Italian, but I think this relates to everybody and for every language, what are the common struggles that people have when it comes to acquiring pronunciation? So in terms of psychological terms, but also technical terms, like, for example, what are the most difficult sounds for non-native speakers, for example, specifically for native English speakers trying to learn Italian?
Okay. For instance, if we're talking about learning Italian for Anglophones, I would say the vowels are obviously very... they're not complicated per se, because it's not a huge amount of vowels, but still you're gonna have, and this is something that always happens, you're gonna have the interference of English vowel phonemes in Italian. So you're going to add sounds that do not exist in Italian. So for instance, many English speakers use the schwa a lot. Right. In Italian, and they reduce final vowels, for instance, or unstressed vowels.
You have a couple of examples.
Yeah. I don't know, like carezza. I think many English speakers could say like something like carezza, or carezza. Maybe they do the R, the R well, they do the ts, but they say carezza. Maybe they don't quite pronounce the a in a way that Italians would, for instance. Mm-hmm. And of course you have, difference in consonant sounds as well, and you have difference at the phrase level as well, which is also another thing. For instance, elision is an important feature of Italian. So if I say, for instance, dove hai mangiato, I'm not going to say dove hai mangiato, I'm going to say dove hai, and sometimes I can even elide the e and say dove hai mangiato. Right. It doesn't sound wrong to you if I say dove hai mangiato.
Well, yeah, because you have connected speech, so you always have to you kind of eat words like in English, right?
But many people say dove hai mangiato.
It
dove
sounds like
hai.
A robot.
So
dove
there's an extra syllable that we elide. It's not there.
Yeah.
So but and also one thing I think we didn't mention: learning pronunciation is good for understanding better, like to better understand other people, and I think that's also true for accents. Italian has a lot of different accents. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you know many languages. I don't know if there are other languages that where there are so many different accents, regional accents, but in Italian there are a lot. And I think maybe you don't want to learn every single accent and become like Luca, who can do like 20 accents in Italian, but it's a good idea to at least get familiar with the main feature of different accents so that you can understand them better.
So, an example of a typical question that people ask me is, should I learn, that I was asked by foreigners, should I learn the accent from Florence? Should I learn the accent from Rome? What kind of accent should you learn when you're a beginner?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm a believer in, when it comes to the case of Italian at least, in neutral pronunciation.
Right. What is neutral pronunciation?
Yeah, that's a difficult question because there is no place in Italy where neutral pronunciation is really spoken, and neither Florence nor Milan nor Rome. It is sort of a construct, but it is a construct that some people use, like voice actors, for instance, or people who use their voice in a professional setting. So, and I have, by the way, I have a course about that, and I have many videos about that. Maybe you can link them below. But it's so, if we will, it's sort of an average of Central Italian pronunciations, if you want to, make it very
general.
To put it simply, and I think it's a good system, it's a good pronunciation to learn because you're going to be understood perfectly by everybody, and you're not gonna have a regional accent that maybe some people don't want to have. Maybe some people don't want to sound like they're from Milan or they're from Rome specifically. If you want, go for it. But if you just want to have a neutral accent, the thing is, there is no city like maybe in other languages where you can just learn the accent of Paris, and that's sort of the neutral accent of French because of political and cultural reason. And in Italy, we don't have that, but there is a model that it's still respected and recognized by Italians themselves as neutral.
Right. I would add that as a beginner, it doesn't really matter because you cannot even tell the difference between an accent from Rome and an accent from Florence. But then, yes, there is a standard. And if you want to learn that, that's perfectly fine. I would also add that the foreigners I met who have a specific accent in Italian, they learned the language immediately by living directly. I don't know, maybe they have a partner from Rome or Florence or Venice. They live directly in the environment just where the majority of the time they listen in that specific accent. In that case, they get a specific accent. But if you're learning at home and you don't have the chance of living in country, in Italy, then it's a different matter, and you can always listen to this man's podcast because his accent is quite neutral. Actually, I can tell you're from the north, but I would say it's a very clean accent that if you learn is just standard, more or less standard.
I've modified it a little bit in order to neutralize some of the more regional features I have in my speech. It's not something teachers have to do, but I think it's good also for teachers to be aware that they might have a regional accent, and not many teachers do, if I have to be completely honest. So because maybe you're learning from someone who comes from from a specific city and they have a strong accent, and maybe as a learner you're picking up those features, but you don't really want to, like you didn't set out to do that, and so but you didn't know that your teacher or your whatever people you're following had that accent. So I try to be as neutral as possible, and but it's also good. It's mandatory in Italian to be exposed to lots of different accents as well, because can you really say that you understand Italian if you don't understand someone from Sicily or from Veneto or from Naples? Right. I don't think so. So
the bottom line is start with this man, and then you can venture into the beautiful landscape of the different diversity of Italian accents in Italy. Okay, so
maybe
very interesting. I have two final questions. One is about the psychology of acquiring a different accent, in particular Italian, and the other one is how to actually do this. Like, if you have any pieces of advice of like what do you do in practice in order to improve. So let's start with the first one. My question is, do you think that speaking with a native-sounding accent gives you confidence when it comes to speaking a language?
I think it totally does. In
your case, for example, how do you feel when you speak English and you get complimented of your accent? Does it motivate you to do even, like, has this played a role when you get compliments from native speakers saying, oh, you speak so well?
It is very flattering. As we were saying yesterday, once there was an American guy who didn't believe I was an American and asked me for my passport. He wanted to see my passport. It doesn't happen that often, and I think you can tell that I'm not American. But yeah, of course, it's an ego boost.
It's an ego boost. I was about to say exactly the same thing.
Totally an ego boost. And I don't know, for me, if I manage to speak well with a good accent, I just feel good when I do
feels
so.
Good. Yeah, it feels
I
good.
feel good, and that goes for any language.
The
Psychological,
One more thing I wanted to ask you: do you think that anybody can achieve a native like pronunciation, or do you think this is just a feature of the few lucky ones who happen to have a talent for or a knack for accents?
I think you can get better. Everybody can get better for sure. And if you do certain things, you're gonna get better. I think it's very hard to get to a near native level of pronunciation, and it's almost impossible for most people. Of course, it depends on a lot of variables. There are people who, and if we're talking about people who don't live in the country of the target language, I would say it's difficult. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult, and it shouldn't be the goal. You shouldn't be obsessed with that, I think, because it's almost unattainable, in my opinion. Even like the two of us, we speak very good American English, but there's always going to be minor details so you can get very close. And I think we have to mention, like, I think talent plays a role. Like,
we have to talk about this. Maybe
you won't agree with that. I don't know if you will, but I think, the people that I met who speak with very good accents, they have a very evident ability of picking up sounds very quickly. Right. And so I think talent plays a role. It shouldn't stop you from trying to get better if you feel like it doesn't come as easy to you. But, I think it does play a role. Like everything else in language learning, there's going to be an innate element. Like you might have innately better memory or being innately better at memorizing words, for instance. So you have to improve. Some people are going to find it easier, I think.
I think nurture versus nature. This is the common thing, not just in language learning. I believe, if I can share my opinion, I believe that...
It's your channel.
It's my channel. Yeah, it's your interview. It's my channel. I believe 80% is hard work and wanting to sound like a native. 20% is talent. So for the bottom line is that if you work hard on it and if you're interested in it, you're going to get a very good pronunciation. But to get to the upper echelons, let's say, of a native sounding accent, a talent or an inclination towards imitation in general can make a difference. This is the kind of cover the final stretch. Okay, so that's for the psychological part of acquiring an accent. What is it that you do to improve accents, to improve your pronunciation, and what is it that your students do? Like, I know that this is kind of complex, but some very practical tips on what to do every day to improve your pronunciation.
So first of all, I would suggest separating sounds from letters, or phonemes from graphemes, if you want to be really nerdy about it, because letters are not sounds. Writing is a technology that's usually not very good. It depends on the language, but you can't rely on orthography to understand how a language is spoken. So sounds are one thing. Orthography is a different thing. It's not even
rough representation of sound.
Orthography is not language per se. It's a technology that's used to write language. It's language adjacent, if you will, but it's not the language per se. So you have to understand that. I think it's good to understand the concept of phonemes. So these sounds that are discrete categories in a language that convey meaning, and you have to learn what the sounds with the phonemes are and how their pronunciation can vary. In other words, allophones in linguistic terms. I think it's useful, that's my opinion, to learn the IPA. Not everybody agrees. I don't think it's necessary, but I think it's useful because it's something you can do relatively quickly. And if you know many languages, many of the symbols are going to transfer from one language to the next. So you have to learn like 20, 30 symbols. It's not, and many of them are going to be similar to some Latin letters. So it's not impossible. I think it's very useful to do that. With what other tips? Shadowing is a technique that I think most polyglots use, and it's very good, especially for learning intonation.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I would say doing some active listening when you're listening to a language. Maybe spend some time actually paying attention, almost like in a mindful way, being mindful of every single sound feature, of every single detail. Maybe you can do it, 5 minutes a day. You shouldn't do it for hours on end, I think, but you should do it for short stretches of time, and then maybe also try to do some shadowings. But I think you shouldn't spend too much time doing that because it might get boring.
If I may add one piece of advice, I would say focus on chunks of language. So, for example, say you're learning Italian, right? And you hear all'inizio, at the beginning. So instead of focusing on the single parts, all'inizio is just 2 words, but you learn a dire la verità, to be frank, right? A dire la verità. You learn the entire expression, a dire la verità. So maybe when you're shadowing, you can shadow by using chunks of language. A dire la verità. This is what I do for Serbian, for example. I learn these expressions that help me, or connectors, or, a dire la verità, per esempio. So these are all chunks of language. Then you can connect one with one another. Like you can start form sentences. And I think this is a way of going about pronunciation.
Speech, yes, because speech is a flow. It's not separate words. It's
beautiful philosophical note. Speech is a flow. It is indeed a flow.
Yeah. And actually, like being fluent, even in the word fluent, of course, fluency entails many different things. But if we're talking about this concept of flowing, I think speech has to flow. It shouldn't stop too much, and words should be connected, and you have to learn how words interact and how sounds combine, how you can go from a sound to another sound, for instance.
Yeah, don't take sounds as like single parts, but just see them as parts of a whole. This is a very important thing, that if you learn how to do it properly with the right training, it can work wonders for you. So speaking of training, as we said, we hinted at it before, you have a course for those who want to learn Italian, right? What's the name of this course?
It's called Fonetica Italiana Semplice, and I talk about Italian pronunciation, Italian phonetics. I give an introduction to articulatory phonetics, and I talk about all of the sounds in detail. There are exercises as well. I talk about phrase level phenomena that happen in the language, and the people who've taken the course so far have really enjoyed it. So
fantastic. You can find a link in the various links in the description box in case you're learning Italian and you're interested in improving your pronunciation. Davide, thank you very much from the bottom of my heart, and I'll see you guys very soon. Bye from Warsaw.
Bye from now.